Hi everyone, is everyone able to hear me? Yeah. Hi, I'm Shuwanna Aaron, the Women's Officer at NUS Scotland, and welcome to the panel on structure and change. Today, unfortunately, we don't have with us Miss Phyll, but I'll read her bio and Jess will also say a few words on her behalf. So Miss Phyll is the co-founder and director of UK Black Pride, a Diva magazine columnist, a Stonewall trustee, a trade unionist, and an equalities campaigner who focuses on intersectionality. Phyll has been named in the Independent Rainbow list as one of the top 100 most influential LGBT people and also in the World Pride Power list. Phyll prides herself as a passionate and diligent activist and has worked tirelessly to build UK Black Pride, bringing together LGBT activists, artists, volunteers and supporters from across communities. And her efforts are constantly recognised. Phyll has received a nomination and recognition by way of an MBE, which she rejected. She said, "I don't believe in empire. I don't believe in and actively resist colonialism and its toxic, enduring legacy in the Commonwealth, where, among other injustices, LGBTQI people are still being prosecuted, tortured, and even killed because of sodomy laws." We also have with us today Layla-Roxanne Hill. Layla is a writer, a curator, and researcher interested in deconstruction of cultural production, marginality, and Black Scottish lives. She has been shortlisted for the right to end violence against women and has contributed through reimagining self and rising consciousness of existence through alternative space and reimagined place at Glasgow International Festival 2018. Power, Gender and the Arts at Edinburgh International Festival and Another World for Bella Caledonia. She is head of engagement at investigative journalism platform The Ferret, a member of the National Union of Journalists, National and Scottish Executive Councils, and Scottish Trade Union Congress Black Workers Committee. We also have Jacob V Joyce, a multidisciplinary artist using art, music, and creative interventions to amplify historical and nourish new queer anti-colonial narratives. They have been the artist in residence at Nottingham Contemporary Gallery, and in the fall of 2018, they will be starting a residency at the Tate Modern and British Museums. Joyce also works as a freelance illustrator, creating the artwork for international human rights campaigns and produces comic book and zines which address personal and global instances of systemic oppression. Joyce is also a member of the Sorry You Feel Uncomfortable collective and the front of the band Screaming Toenail, in which their work brings satirical and theatrical critiques to institutional and everyday instances of marginalization. We're going to start with Jess.
So I'm just going to read out a statement from Phyll. Dear Resisting Whiteness, I'm really sorry that I cannot be with you all today. There were problems with EasyJet and they would not let me on my flight. Their excuse is that I was too late. My understanding is because I'm wearing African attire and they were resisting my African blackness, but I'm not ready to unpack that right now. Thank you, Jessica, for reading this on my behalf, even if I can only contribute to this discussion via a note. This conference is so important for so many reasons. I cancelled going to the Labour Party Women's Conference because I'm sure this conference would address the issues of structures, privilege and anti-blackness which may not or would not be unpacked within this conference. As the co-founder and executive director of UK Black Pride, one of the most diverse prides in Europe, where we promote unity and cooperation among all black people of African, Asian, Caribbean, Middle Eastern and Latin American descent, as well as their friends and families who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender or queer, I ask myself how woke I really am. I like to believe I am in tune to what is happening within our communities as a black lesbian working class woman, but I'm also not afraid to ask where I don't know, what I don't know. And I'm prepared to listen and learn to ensure UK Black Pride and the gay queer job is as inclusive and as diverse as possible. This is what my daughter will call staying woke. As a black lesbian woman, I've experienced every prejudice, challenge and smack in the proverbial mouth you can imagine, from the workplace to any number of institutions and establishments. What I go through as a black woman at work and society at large is well documented, and so I use every opportunity to speak to other black women who may be queer, lesbian, disabled, working class, etc. In my day job, gay job, and being a mother, this is the first time I'm reading this, and it's wonderful. I'm going to say it again. In my day job, gay job, and being a mother, I am radical in celebrating in the face of a world that often tells me we shouldn't be here, or that we are less than or not worthy. And at times this has surprised me, even though I know it to be so true. I don't give up, and I want to give up, and I don't want to give up. UK Black Pride. On any given day, someone is telling you to stand up straight and smile. All eyes are on you. Don't embarrass your family. No one will take you seriously if you talk like that. You don't need to flaunt it in our faces, do you? You were born with a dick, so you'll never be a real woman. So you'll go back home. Let me check your pockets, and you should be grateful we allowed you in this country. Someone is trying to free you from the oppression of Islam, save you from savages who sit in their own shit or mansplain what feminism means. Someone who's never read Bell Hooks or Kimberly Crenshaw Williams telling you intersectionality isn't a thing, that this isn't the oppression Olympics, the wanting to fight racism, sexism, homophobia and transphobia all at the same time can't be done. So I need to take a reprieve from the assault course of my life that many of us know so intimately is the reason I, with members in the community, set up UK Black Pride 14 years ago. Audre Lorde reminds us that we do not have to be each other to know each other, to know that our fight is the same. And even as some draw the benefits of black liberation struggles that united the diasporas in the 70s, 80s, 90s and early noughties, it's important we find a way to reimagine and revive the collectivism that bound us so tightly together at the start of this journey. I resist whiteness in many different ways. In 2016, I rejected an MBE from the Queen. As a trade unionist, as a working class girl and an out black African lesbian, I want to stand by my principles and values. I want to dismantle structures, but still learning with others how we do that. We need academics, researchers, legislators, activists in order to do this. I wish you a good conference. Let's look at ways we can work together to resist whiteness and smash capitalism. Solidarity.
Thank you, Ms. Phyll, for that note. What we're going to do is start with a few questions for our panelists, and then I'll go into the audience if you have any questions. So I'll start with Jacob. What value do you think art and media has in resisting whiteness and driving change?
I think that's a really interesting question because... Wait, can you repeat it again? A bit slower, actually.
Sorry. What value do you think art and media has in resisting whiteness and driving change?
I guess first I have to unpack for myself what whiteness means. And I feel like whiteness, as my understanding of whiteness, is something that was formed in relationship to people of colour. Like whiteness didn't exist before colonialism. Like it was only when people started to see these different types of people around the world and categorize them that they created their own racial identity in response to that. And I kind of feel that art and media has always been very much the way that that's been done. If you think about anthropology and the anthropological drawings of people, the kind of ways that people of colour have been depicted, the kind of stereotypes or tropes that we see within things like painting or anthropological studies that depict different types of tropes of, you know, African people as being a certain way, or Asian people being a certain way, or people like from indigenous cultures and different diasporas being in certain ways. It feels that art and media has always been part and parcel of the ways in which we have understood what a non-white subject or one non-white person is. So in terms of how can art and media be used to maybe not resist but subvert that power structure in my own practice, I think that that kind of taking these tropes, I'm getting weird like feedback from this mic, it's bothering me, but in terms of using that same mechanism back and turning it back on whiteness is something that I like to do. So I like to encourage people to think about the tropes of whiteness. So I have a performance piece, and it's also an illustrated book called The Alphabetical Anthology of White Middle-Class Liberal Proverbs. And it's like an A to Z of things that white middle-class people say white middle-class liberal people say often very well-intentioned things without really thinking that, you know, it's a problem. Everything from, you know, all lives matter to can I touch your hair to, you know, be the change you want to see in society to, you know, there's endless white proverbs. And I think when I started making that work, people of colour were saying, I hear that all the fucking time, I hear that every day. And you realise that actually the same way that people of colour have been turned into tropes or reduced down to these categories, if we turn that back on whiteness, we can actually start to, I don't know, see it in a different way, and also maybe start to realise that it's realise the violence in the ways that these things manifest over and over again. Can you say the question one more time? Sorry.
Yep. What value do you think art and media has in resisting whiteness and driving change?
I mean, it's such a huge question because obviously art and media is like everything, from films to writing to the news. I think it's invaluable that we are afforded spaces where we can see each other in relationship to each other. So just to go back to this idea of resisting whiteness, it's something that I was struggling with when I was hearing about the conference and trying to unpack, because I feel like the idea of resisting something is kind of centering it. It's kind of thinking, this is the thing that I need to be gathering around, this is the thing I need to be thinking about, and in a way it feels like you're centering whiteness. And there's a Jamaican cultural theorist called Sylvia Wynter who has a concept that she calls demonic grounds. So in computer science, there's an idea of a demonic equation. So a demonic equation is an equation that you can't possibly know the answer to. There's not a way to see what the equation of the answer will be. And Sylvia Wynter kind of uses the Shakespeare play, I think it's the Tempest, or the one where they get washed up on an island, and there's native people on the island, there's a witch, and the witch's son is called Caliban. And she kind of talks about how there's indigenous people in this narrative, but we only know them through the eyes of whiteness. We only know them in relationship to the white characters. And she says, what if we were to think about Caliban's friend or partner or lover, and what if we kind of were afforded these spaces where we can see this racialized subject in relationship to another racialized subject? And she calls that ground, that space, a demonic ground. And it's something that Catherine McKendrick and other writers and academics have expanded on in great detail. But I really like this idea of creating spaces in which black people of colour can kind of see each other in relationship to each other. So in terms of art and media, I think that's what I think is powerful and potent, when we can see publications like Gaudem and Sistren and lots of different black-led publications which look at black people through the eyes of black people, not mediated through a filter of whiteness. I think it's invaluable to be able to see each other in relationship to each other, and yeah, it's not something that I can kind of anecdotally briefly sum out all of the different multitudes of values that come from it, but I think it's really important that we don't always see ourselves through the prism of whiteness, and that we can, whether it's music, whether it's films, whether it's news, whatever it is, I think we don't know the answers to that equation yet, because often we're not afforded it, but I think it's always going to be a useful conversation and useful space to have, and in a way we do know, because we can look back and see that there have been so many publications and there have been so many movements and films and things that often, you know, get erased but are there, which people have been doing this for years. So it's a long answer, but I hope that answers it.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I will ask a question of Layla-Roxanne. Layla-Roxanne, you have an interest in deconstruction of cultural production, marginality and black Scottish lives. Do you think that Scotland has a place for black people and other people of colour more so than the rest of the UK? Are Scottish institutions doing better at driving structural change than the rest of the UK?
Thanks for that big question. Big questions. I think Scotland has a place for black people and for people of colour, but it's very much through the Scottish perception of progression and acceptance, and that we don't see skin colour, that we're too busy trying to deal with our otherness. And we have been we've been a nation that's been colonised by other areas of the UK, namely England, and that we have our own struggle in terms of the Irish Catholic immigration people's experience, which also gets minimised to sectarianism. That's an easy way to deal with that difficulty. And there's also a kind of interesting dynamic between migrants and blackness, and our focus on the migrant experience, and we welcome refugees kind of allows us not to see blackness in that sort of way. And we're very welcoming, we're very able, we have a space, but it's not a space. The space is one that's determined through Scottish progressiveness, which essentially is whiteness, and its own idea of colonialism. In terms of cultural production, I feel that there's definitely in the arts and in the media, there's a need to make visible the trauma that can play a central part of the lives of black women, especially women of colour in Scotland, who are often at the receiving ends of racism and sexism. But there should be, I think as Jacob was saying, a way for women to express themselves, black people and people of colour to express themselves in ways that go beyond expectation and fetishisation of that pain and of that internal turmoil and of the sense of location and dislocation. Why does it always have to be seen as coming from elsewhere? Why can't it be of being from here? So there's that idea that you don't belong here still. Black art, black writing, for example, doesn't always have to be about Africa. It doesn't have to be about the Caribbean or the notion of home being elsewhere. That's very much a sense of our identity. But we are here, and some of us have existed here for quite some time, and we're not a monolithic group. Our experiences are complex and varied, and they are deserving of a place that recognises that, and one that doesn't fetishise the other in ways that is very similar to the rest of the UK. There's also, I think it's part of the art scene, it's part of media, it's part of this machine, which essentially is PR. It's a great PR machine that promotes whiteness. As you mentioned, Caliban, he's not allowed to have a past except one that has a mother who's very invisible and a father that he can't trace back to. There's a desire to fund black creativity, black arts, but again it's always through a colonial space which dilutes the experience of just expressing yourself. I work for an organisation that is owned by its members, but because it's predominantly white membership, it's very difficult to get stories across that don't feed into that fetishisation of the other. So, and structures and institutions in Scotland, I know that there's Glasgow University's doing a lot around colonialism, it's doing a lot around the transatlantic slave trade, but again, it's our experience doesn't necessarily always have to come from that place, and there's an idea, or there's a desire to ensure that you're always the other, that you belong to that experience when you may well not, if that works. Oh, and I could talk about digital deconstruction of cultural production in that sense as well. We form our communities online, we form them on Facebook, we form them on Twitter, we find groups, we find a sense of community online that we've never been able to find, like say in a predominantly white space, which is Scotland. But again, it's questioning who owns that, who's getting our algorithms, who's feeding off that rich culture that's being developed online. So yeah,
Thank you.
Speak a little bit more about that.
That's okay. Do we have any questions from the audience at the moment? I see someone over there.
Yes. How are you see the current my question is a bit about you doing lessons with it on thinking that time. My question is a bit about because we respond to the concept of blackness and we try and tell our own story. I feel like often, even though we aim to portray ourselves in our own stories and from our own perspectives, it's still a response rather than saying or taking ourselves out of the context of being black and white. And I think that's what I think the question is what should we do in response to that, and how can we make our stories more authentic and not related to, I guess, slavery or the suffering or the whiteness and oppression? How can we bring our experience? Does that make sense?
I feel like for me that's the definition of decolonize. It's like a constant reinvention, because we can't, there's this implicit labor of trying to exist or tell a story that isn't in response to whiteness, but then at the same time whiteness exists, and you're thinking about the ways in which black bodies specifically are expected to perform, or black characters are expected to exist, and just the ways that we even talk and write and writing a character. There's so many things, like I find myself when I'm telling a story like, oh, there was this black woman on the bus, instead of saying, I've had to make a conscious effort to always say there was a white woman on the bus, and not just say a woman, as if like there's just the status quo is just the person is always white, and a black is like a character, almost like something additional to the character. I think there's so many ways in which we've kind of ingested this idea that black is this other non-normative thing in different ways, and that when we're talking about blackness, unfortunately, we have to be second guessing the ways that blackness is read. I make comics and I do illustrations, and when I make an image, it can't just be an image. I have to think about, but how will this be read because it's a black figure? How is the ways that people expect to see black trauma, expect to see black pain, expect black female sexuality to be this kind of way, black male sexuality to be this kind of way, black non-binary sexuality to be this kind of androgynous, desexual, or whatever kind of way. Do you know what I mean? There's all these kind of expectations that have come from the very limited representation of blackness that we've been afforded, and we have to kind of, unfortunately, be thinking about. But I do again think that a way to avoid that is to have reading groups, writing groups, like with other black people, and kind of be making stuff in relation to each other's experiences, and yeah, I think it's a continual reinvention, and they're not, you mentioned about Caliban that he cannot have a past, and I think that in so many ways black people have been severed from a past, and I'm not saying that we should romanticize a past in Africa or in the Caribbean and ignore all the awful things that happen, but I think we've also been severed from all the fantastic and amazing different things that happened as well, in terms of cultures, in terms of gender, in terms of empires. So I think the only way that we and it's awful, but some of those things we just won't be able to find out about. And I think it takes imagination, it takes reinvention, and it takes coming together and being like, okay, well, what can we build now, new, to really fill that gap, and not always be feeling like you have to be speaking to whiteness, but sometimes you could be speaking to someone who's not white, and the conversation and things you create can be new and exciting.
Okay, thank you. I have a kind of a follow-up question. A bit earlier, you spoke about creating spaces for ourselves, almost as in a reaction to being the change we want to see, and also from that question about how do we kind of how do we not react to whiteness? My question is can you be radical in an institution, and is it worth the personal investment and effort for the potential overall change of institution that wasn't designed for us, considering the amount of labor that goes in? Or should we distance ourselves from these institutions, create alternative spaces where we can have more control, or is it kind of a balancing act?
Is that for both of us?
Yeah, I can start with you.
Okay. I think it's case by case. I think unfortunately we have to navigate institutions because we all have to like pay our rent and stuff and buy food and learn, yeah. Or like, yeah. I mean, I don't think we need institutions to learn, but I think there's useful things definitely that we can learn within them. But I think we have to navigate these spaces. Unfortunately, well, there's pros and cons. Whether we can be radical within them, yeah, definitely. I think radical is a pretty flexible word. My favourite definition of the word radical is Angela Davis's definition that it just means to grasp something by the roots. And I think we can definitely find ways to do that. As somebody who is, I'm just about to start this residency at the Tate, and I've been very vocal about my frustrations with the Tate in the past. They invited me to do a workshop with, they invited me to do 3 workshops with 8 to 14-year-olds. So I made sure that so what I did for the workshops was that I made a call out saying the Tate Modern and the Tate Britain have a collection of over 3,750 something artists in their permanent collection. Under 10 of them are Black British. So this is like, actually I would say it's an erasure of Black British art, which there is an incredible movement of for a long time. And I said, the call out said, if you're an artist, if you're black and you make art, or if you know of a black artist you think should have been acknowledged by the Tate at this point, send photos of their work, send photos of your work, and we're going to project those and give children inks and brushes, and we're going to make a mural of all the art that the Tate should have acknowledged by now. And so I've been very vocal about the Tate, the shortcomings of the Tate. And as someone who's about to start working there for a year, I'm really interested in becoming parts of like black, the unions, not the unions, sorry, the I don't know what they're called, but there's like a network of all the different black staff, like from cleaners to curators to, I should have memorized the name of the group, but I'm interested in like cross-disciplinary conversations, because I think a way that stuff gets stifled is that people stay in their sectors and they don't talk to each other. And I think from talking to older artists like Sonia Boyce, who's an incredible black British painter whose work is in the Tate, it seems that people have been asking the Tate to consider these things and change these things for a really long time, and I feel that my personal guess as to why things have taken such a long time to change is because the power only goes so far. Once you get to a certain level, everybody's white. They may get like a black artist like myself in for like a year to do some workshops and call it a residency, or they may get like a curator here who's like Asian or something like that. But I think, or an assistant curator. I think actually, from my understanding, they say after a certain level, everybody's white. And I think that so there's often institutions. I think there definitely is like scope for radical action within institutions, but I think what needs to happen first is that they need to not be run by white men. There needs to be some people of colour at the top making really important decisions, and there also needs to be cohesion across all platforms. So it's like it's not just this group of people who work in this department who can do something. It's across department. Those are my hopes for how things could potentially be radical.
Okay. Thank you. Layla?
Yeah, institutions aren't going anywhere anytime soon. I think it's that realisation. I think it's like looking for a radical agenda in such like difficult times that we're living in at the moment. In Scotland, we've had Indie Ref, which has like really pushed a sense of identity, like for people in Scotland and for Scotland itself, followed by the EU referendum. And so there's been all of these kind of like notions of like what identity is and who belongs like where, essentially. But the institutions, are still here. And we expect like quick change. We expect like the excitement that we had, like particularly around like a possibility of hope, a possibility of change, and we want change like very, very fast. But sometimes it's realising that you have to just sow the seeds of change. And that might be your job, just to sow and plant an idea of change. I know Suki and I, like within the Black Workers, STUC, Scottish Trade Union Council, not to use acronyms, Black Workers Committee, and Melina, who's also here, we were really advocating to have a discussion that allowed a different perspective in, and we were met with some conflict is probably the best word for it, but at least that's been minuted, and that's been documented, and that will raise itself again. So it's this idea that we need to start thinking about what we can do to make sure that the past doesn't become erased, and start planting like seeds now. It's a lot of work. There's some of us that are in better situations to do it than others, and once we get in, it's about bringing other people in, as you're saying, working your way to the top. But of course it's challenging, and what you were saying about like learning, it's also about unlearning. And we have to be careful that we don't fall into a trap, and that's what I see whiteness as. You fall into a trap of being quite comfortable being in your position, of head of engagement or somewhere, and it's just like, oh, okay, that's quite nice. I sit on a nice little committee, like doing this, doing that. I don't need to think about anybody else. I don't need to try for like change, or if I do, it's going to upset people. Like, I'm here as a token, but you need to do more beyond your token if you can, and start planting those seeds, start supporting the people that have been doing the work for a long time that haven't been acknowledged, because that's erasing their history. There are people that have existed in Scotland that have done anti-racist grassroots, anti-whiteness, like grassroots work for years, but then we come along, we think we're the new ones, we're the fresh ones, we're doing things differently, and that's not necessarily the case. But we also need to support, those that are coming up and make sure that they are being heard whilst trying to push to the top, whilst also creating alternatives that everybody can feel safe and supported in. So it's not one or the other. It's being aware of what you can do within your limited space, and if you have the strength to. There's some of us that can move more freely in institutions than others. Do you want to use that voice for bringing other people in? Do you want to be that voice of dissent, or do you not? It's a lot of personal ownership, which sometimes people don't feel is worth the labour. But we need to start making markers for what our future is going to be, like if we're going to stay here. Big if.
And I think in response to that, it's like trying to understand the ways in which people are prevented from resisting or making changes. And I think there's so many different reasons why people financially don't want to risk losing their job or saying something, or they don't have the emotional energy to engage in a conversation that they feel like, especially when you are the token, if you're like one of only a very small amount of people of colour working in an institution, and that saying something is going to turn you into the antagonist. Like, I've just finished a master's, a Goldsmiths in Art and Politics, and it was really awful. Like, I found that so often something would happen, and then I'd be like, I was thinking, I really wish that I had a robot, that, like a humanoid robot that could just do the labour of engaging with whiteness. You just switch it on and it just puts its hand up and it says like, oh, this is racist. And you're like, wow, I agree with that robot. Carry on doing your writing or whatever, like let the robot fucking have that awkward conversation. Cause like, but it's like, it's just like, I'm here to study, I'm paying so much money to be here that I'm going to be indebted for so long, and now I have to have an awful conversation that's gonna, in various different ways, just gonna make me seem as if I'm being an angry black person for like saying this thing, or just create an extra amount of labour that you might not have the energy to do that day. And it's too probably to go into all the different ways in which that's manifested. Really obvious things like asking a teacher who's white not to use the N-word, which I would have thought would be really obvious, to like doing 2 modules that are so incredibly relevant to black study, black history, black experiences, that didn't mention blackness at any point throughout the whole module, where I started to think I was going crazy. Like a module called counter mapping, like black people are the most policed, most captured, most put in this space, put in that space, cut that continent in half. Like, if anyone should be invested in counter mapping, it could be all of the different black academics that have written about counter mapping. but that course didn't mention blackness at all. And when I brought that up, the teacher was like, I'm going to put some bell hooks on the reading list. And it's like, bell hooks doesn't even write about that shit. Like, what are you talking about? Like, am I going crazy here?
This is one of the things that I think Shuwanna will probably be able to bounce off from that, because being in an educational institution as a student, I wasn't going to talk, I was just going to read Phil's thing, but this is just reminded me, being a student, being a person of colour or a student of colour, you do have that extra thing of you're not just here to get your education and to learn. Like, so much more of your time as a student is spent with this bullshit of navigating whiteness and navigating stupid questions in lectures and nonsense responses and microaggressions and the use of the N-word or the use of Negro that some lecturers think is okay to use, some white lecturers think is okay to use in their tutorials, whereas our white counterparts are there just to go to class and to learn and to make their notes and to write their essays. And yet so many people in our committee are students who are doing 2, 3, 4 other things activism related on top of their degrees or on top of whatever their part-time job is. Yeah.
I think like just what you were saying before as well, it's about like that not crossing over. Like if you can find like another institution, you know, say for example a trade union that could come in and do like some of that work, you know, and it's like undertake like and draw away some of the emotional labour you're having to put in. It's that not being siloed and having a more transdisciplinary approach, big word, approach, and making sure that we are sharing like what is not great like in this particular place, you know, like why are lecturers being allowed to say like Negro like within a workplace? Why did I go into a meeting and somebody asked, would you like to sit on our board so we can get money for diversity? I'm just like, no, I have no interest in your eco-warrior thing, it's fine. And like, you know, speak about this and find and have those alternative spaces as well that we can speak about it, share it, and pass that labour on to people that are maybe in a better situation still than us, that we can like just enjoy being in a way that isn't like massively policed.
And also I think like something that's literally been, you know, a life raft in a sea of whiteness has been the collective that I'm part of, Sorry You Feel Uncomfortable. So we've done lots of different things. Sometimes, you know, we'll have a party, sometimes we'll curate exhibitions. Just had an exhibition in Glasgow International called What Are You Doing About White Supremacy, which was cool. But one of the things that we always do as well is reading groups. We make sure that we have a text and everybody has a copy of the text, and then we go through and you read a sentence, I read a sentence, you read a sentence, you read a sentence, it goes in a circle, and if at any point someone doesn't understand, then we stop and we say, okay, let's work out what this means. Because I think that academia is set up in this way that there's just an assumption that everybody's like gonna understand the same things and have the same ability to, you know, or way of thinking about things. And I think that having spaces, you know, and there are spaces open to people, black, white, whatever, where we can kind of unpack these things together has been really valuable. I'll just say that I don't know the exact dates, but I know that we are doing a project in Glasgow soon in October called the Black Drift, which is a walk through different parts of Glasgow as a form of studying. And if you're interested in that, and Sorry You Feel Uncomfortable, you can just check it out on Facebook or Instagram and find out details about that. And also, just to clarify, the teacher that was saying N-word wasn't saying Negro, it was the other N-word. So I think I would probably just roll my eyes if the teacher said that. But yeah, I think making spaces for study like outside of institutions is really, really, really important. And that's why I think collectives like Resisting Whiteness are so important. It's like having spaces outside.
You're not wrong. They're not wrong.
So we talked a bit about like having to navigate institutions because we have to pay our rent and eat, and it's something that like I've had to do as the Black Students Officer at in NUS and at Edinburgh University. And one of the things that I kind of find a bit of like a balancing act is like, where do you draw the line between like receiving funding for like diversity stuff and like where do you receive funding? Where do you draw the line between like receiving funding essentially for being a token, and using their platform. But also quite a lot of our institutions are doing stuff around like diversity and equality initiatives. Having sat on that board at Edinburgh University, I can say it's trash. But apart from that, how does everyone else feel about equality and diversity initiatives? And then also for Layla, how is that working in the trade union movement? And do you think the trade union movement has a space for anti-racist action? And should we be encouraging more trade unionism in our communities?
As a trade unionist, I'm always going to say join a trade union. Join several. I'm a member of the NUJ and the Scottish Artists Union, and yes, sit on the STUC, Scottish Trade Union Congress Black Workers Committee. I think when you join, it's a really good way to learn an amazing amount of skills and come together with a lot of people that are fighting and advocating for change. So that's there, that's the base. But obviously, as with anywhere, there is a lot of conflict, of politics. Just because it's rooted in the left, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's left or radical left. There's a desire to silo people into particular roles. Like when I got involved with the National Union journalists, they're just like, okay, you can sit in our black members seat. I was like, right, okay, and that limits you. However, if you try and go through other places, get onto the executive councils, where you can actually make real change, and it's coming from, a black mixed race, women perspective. It's helpful to do that. I've been encouraging people to take up equality and diversity, or equalities roles and equality officers roles, particularly black people, because it's an easy way, because equalities tends to be bunched into LGBTQIA, living with a disability, and all the other protected characteristics, which I can't remember. And at least if you have a black person that's doing that work, they are meeting people and getting familiar with women who are coming, with pregnancy or maternity issues, and they're speaking to a black man that they didn't, expect to be able to deal with equalities issues. So there's a space, I forgot what the question was, there's just rambling. There's a space within that we're not to fall into that same trap, and don't do the whole Frans Fanon of black skin, white masks, where you do the work for the white people on their behalfs, and again, just sit quite comfortably on your committees, attend meetings, just because it's nice to be able to go places and do things. The trade union movement does do, and I think particularly, I'm not just saying this because I have colleagues in the crowd. I know that this year's Black Workers Committee has faced a lot of criticism for remaining silent on various issues, but we've really been working hard behind the scenes, and maybe it's because it's not visible. It's been quite difficult to demonstrate the impact of the work that we've been doing within workplaces and within the larger community. What else was I going to say? Yeah, I think just around that sort of thing, around tokenism, it will be there, it will continue to be there. It's the nature of our society to have, the first black, whatever, to have the first, whatever, and that tokenism has to push for substantive change, which again can be done, but is very slow. Get yourself into positions, lay positions, get people familiar with the idea. It's a place, trade unions can be a place to express your idea and learning within an institution which won't be restricted or limited. And yeah, just go beyond your surface level diversity, I think, basically.
But also support the people in those roles.
Support.
Because I think if you have, you might have your first black professor of whatever, or your first black head of such and such a organisation, but they can only do so much by themselves. So if you know those people are out there and they exist, get behind them and see how you can help them so they're not doing it by themselves.
Okay, and I have another question which is around political blackness, and that's something that is used in union spaces in the NUS. It's a conversation that we've been having around changing our campaign from the Black Students Campaign to something else. And one of the issues that we've come up against is we don't exactly know what to change it to, because obviously there are some issues around Black minority ethnic, Black and minority ethnic, people of colour, and so on. So my question to both of you is, like, how do you feel about political blackness? Do you think it's useful now? Has it ever been useful? Yeah. Do you want to start, Jacob?
Oh, I think it's case by case. In my lifetime, in terms of my generation and the experience I've had, I don't feel that political blackness is like useful. But then I also have to think about stuff like Black Pride, for example, which is a space for all people of colour that centres blackness. And I think that, you know, if you're gonna consider something like Black Pride as an example of political blackness, then I think it's something that's really amazing and beautiful, because it's a space run by Black queer people predominantly, with help from like Asian queer people and Latinx queer people and other Black and brown people. But it centres blackness, and I think that for me, political blackness has to come with an acknowledgement of the ways in which blackness is often erased, and often, like, you know, anti-blackness exists within other types of racialized identities. I think there's a festival that happens around Europe. I think they try to have it at a different location every year, but it's been in Berlin twice. Called QTIPOC, which is a festival for queer people of colour, but it's called QTIPOC because it's queer, trans, intersex, Black people and people of colour. So the B is for Black, and I think that, like, I can understand that people want to have that B there, because there's an acknowledgement that sometimes blackness is erased, or that Black people are expected to identify as people of colour and not Black, and not acknowledging, which kind of in some ways erases the specificities of, like, the way that the anti-blackness is so pervasive in our society, and kind of manifests in a lot more. I mean, it's complicated. I don't think it should be, like, measured against each other. And also, I guess it's a weird question for me, because it's not something that I would ever speak to, because I just don't align with political blackness. It's not something I would ever use. I kind of get confused when I hear people who aren't Black, unless they're of a certain generation, refer to themselves as Black. So it's not something I'm really familiar with. I can see how it could be useful in some situations, and I think in terms of has it been useful in the past, you'd have to talk to people who aligned themselves with it. To be honest, I think different people would have very different opinions, both valid.
Thank you.
I think, particularly in a Scottish context, it's been helpful and it's been powerful to bring together, like, I know we're in Edinburgh, and there seems to be quite a lot of Black and brown faces in the audience in this room, but definitely even Glasgow, like 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been as brown or Black as you see it now. And then even taking into consideration the rural aspect, that you might go for 300 miles and not see, like, another brown or Black face, except maybe on an animal, you know, and that's the lived reality. So political blackness, and even the clumping together of, like, Black and minority ethnics, has been, like, a powerful tool of solidarity. But again, it's that awareness that it can erase, like, the very different and nuanced experiences of Black and Black of Afro-Caribbean descent, and there has to be, like, that sort of understanding that we can all come together, but then understand that not, like, all our experience isn't the same, and we have to do that work within ourselves. You know, it's like we use politically Black within the trade union movement, and we have to, because it's a tool of solidarity. If you were to just say Black and from Afro-Caribbean descent, you would find maybe 2 people on our committee, or part of the Black workers like group. So I think, like, in areas which are predominantly white and doesn't really have, like, that sense of brown and Black solidarity, it comes together and it's used quite well. We're facing quite different, if you're talking about, like, the racialisation and that, you know, the skin colours change and the other becomes now the non-white person, and we're finding this with Roma Gypsy communities, and we're being asked, it's like, if we use our political blackness in that sense to bring together, like, those workers who are also being or just people that are now being racialised in the same way as if they were brown or black. So I think it has its place to bring people together, but we have to do the work to understand, like, to not erase like the very nuances of our experience. I've just repeated myself a few times.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. I guess I was talking about this with Reeta, who's going to speak later. I guess something that I guess if talking about political blackness, I have to kind of talk about what white in relation to whiteness, and it feels to me that whiteness is often not necessarily about skin color, but it's about position, power, privilege, and aspiration. And I think that, like, the way that blackness is framed in politics, in the media, in popular culture, is I don't know, maybe in a very superficial way, is aspirational. But like the thing, you know, lots of other marginalized communities are often kind of used as examples of how black people should be, like you know, the Asian community were able to do this, and the Jewish community were able to do this, and like it's kind of like blackness is always kind of at the bottom in terms of the ways that things are perceived as the way, the direction that we should be moving towards. And I think one thing that I remember hearing frustrations when people were talking about the term political blackness is that, like, political blackness has been useful for non-black people and to build, to get to a certain level, and then they've stopped identifying as politically black. And I think that's, you know, a criticism that I've heard, is that, like, it's the reason why I would shy away from it is because I think blackness needs to be understood like as something specific with a specific set of histories, but then also I'm wary of people identifying as black and moving forward and then suddenly getting to just be like, I'm not black anymore. I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. That worries me, but also I don't know about the Scottish context, and it sounds like, you know, it would, you know, it's a different kettle of fish to the one I'm familiar with.
Yeah, because I think there's, but mind you, I think like within the NUJ, National Union Journalists, the Black Members Council, there was like a long-going like argument about using political blackness, and it was the same, that even though there was quite a high percentage, because, you know, it's mainly centred in London, of Afro-Caribbean descent members, that there was strength in using political blackness. But then at the same time, it's like blackness and black and minority ethnic is also the language of, as you said, like the media, of politicians. It's used as, you know, like a rhetorical device by all these, you know, like representatives of institutions. And of course, it's also like now one of the ways that you also access funding, you know, like through a diversity or black minority ethnic, and that comes under the same umbrella as politically black. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take some questions from the audience now. Oh, quite a lot. Should we just start at the back?
Oh, I think we've got one here at the front first, yeah.
Hi, I'm Lish. I'm part of the Edinburgh Decolonizing discussion group, and we've been trying to kind of, we live outside of the university construct, but one of the struggles we found in Scotland, because we do a lot of that, we put text together and kind of different, like, explain them outside of academia, because a lot of the processes of, like, decolonization have been structured within elite institutions which not everyone can access, including universities. For example, refugee children who don't have papers aren't allowed to go to university. So a lot of the work that we've been trying to do is trying to dismantle that connection that decolonization has to happen within, like, any institutions. But we found that there's a huge struggle, because when we bring up discussions like decolonization, students at universities and the spaces which are, who understand what decolonization means, end up finding that because it's not in the institute itself, it's not useful to them. But we've also found that communities who actually exist in Edinburgh, there's a lot of people of colour who live in Edinburgh who aren't part of the university, they don't get engaged because they think it's too academic for them to get involved as well. So we found that we're in this middle ground of like sort of trying to dismantle the academic institute without actually being part of it and outside of it, and trying to process
ways of learning which are outside of like these spaces which are very controlled and institutionalized. But I guess my question is, how do we do that? How do we bridge the divide between like communities and maybe institutions, especially as like decolonization is something that needs to be done on a level for everyone who is of colour and also not colour.
Yeah, I think, okay, we'll take another question and then we'll answer together.
Hi, I'm Myra, and I found out about this conference through a friend who's doing a PhD at Glasgow. I am a mental health nurse in Edinburgh, and I've been to a few people here that I don't actually personally know anybody, and it's just been really exciting seeing just everybody's faces and it being like, this isn't like Edinburgh at all, but it really is amazing. So Edinburgh's the longest place I've ever lived, 14 years. And it's just to kind of go back to political blackness. So a long time ago, I was a student at Edinburgh University, and political blackness wasn't really a term we used. I only knew one other person of colour, both of us were mixed, we just kind of got on with our kind of feminist liberation type kind of work with our white pals, who also massively feminist liberatory type people. I think though, especially as a person who's mixed Asian white, and my identity is always about what other people perceive me to be, means that I've never really ever felt I belonged. I don't identify as, because you talk about the importance of not erasing blackness and black stories and experience, and that's so valuable and important, and I think it's really important to recognise that, on a micro level, one story and experience is different, and actually coming together is hugely empowering. I'm very aware of, the basis that the town is built on slavery, and that's in the Americas and the Caribbean, which my ancestors, the Browns anyway didn't have anything to do with. But I think that, coming together and having a voice to fight will prefer whiteness, which is giving me my identity that country. I think it's really important to have unity. This is whiteness is something I found out in university. And I guess my question is, I think that, sometimes labels can be useful, mental health, which is around race, but then other times they need to evolve. I kind of agree that political blackness isn't we have to stay. What other terms do you think would be appropriate or have been controlling that recently?
Okay. Is there another question? Yeah.
So I recently went to school from the which was great. Afterwards, I was talking with my white friends who I was speaking with about how great cinematography was, the symbolism, things like that, and totally out of the blue, one of them says to me, so how can I be a good white ally? Now, I wonder if they would have asked for white men for this, if I hadn't been there. And part of me thinks this is kind of a bit of a language version. You wouldn't really ask a white person as, we're talking about things as friends. But on the other hand, I think it's good she's at a point where she's happy to be educated and to learn. And I'm hoping the other white people in the room are at that point as well. The problem I feel is when we get to people who aren't at that point. Like I've had colleagues who get very offended when I tell them that asking me where I'm really from is not appropriate. And I think part of that is being in this post-racial time where people, the majority of people that I know anyway, totally understand that calling a black person an N-word is you know, we're not racist. Why are you asking me where you're from? Racist? It's not. They don't have the level of understanding of microaggressionism, but then they're not actively racist, so they don't accept that they can still do racist things. So I guess the question is, how do we get to, like, how do we deal with people on that level? Because I feel calling it out is more likely to push them further into defensiveness and push them further away from getting to a point of wanting to learn. And I just wonder how we can get people to that point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where do you want to start?
Okay. Yeah, the first question about bridging the gap between institutions and people outside of institutions or outside of universities, I think is a really, really, really important question. And I think that there's lots of, I don't know what the landscape of Edinburgh is like, but I imagine, but I hope, and I can't say, I know that in London there are lots of community groups. You know, there's a few youth centres left. Most of the youth centres have been shut down, and that's where one of the places where I've been working over the last 5 years is youth centres, spaces where I've been working in an elderly people's day centre in Nottingham, working with homeless shelters. Luckily, all of these projects have been funded by different councils and different arts organisations, and you know, but I would say that I think if it depends what kind of work you're trying to do. I think labour is valuable and should be paid for, and if you can find organisations or frameworks that exist, like applying for funding, to be able to like go into different community groups and have resources to build things there. My experience is that youth centres, spaces with elderly people, spaces for homeless people are always really happy to have people come in and like provide workshops or things that people might need. So I think there's loads of frameworks. There's loads of different directions you can go in terms of like, and you know, community. Those are the ones that I've specifically worked for. I know that there are. So I was working in East London, where there's a group called the Recycled Teenagers, which started off as a over 60s Caribbean women's group that meet up once a week, and now it was a Caribbean women's group. Now it's all over 60s, but like they're not a day centre or anything. They're just a group of people that just came together, and I feel like groups like that exist everywhere. People just coming together. And if you're interested in kind of having conversations about decolonising outside of universities, I think those are spaces. But one piece of advice I would give is I don't find it useful to go into a space with a kind of agenda of like, I'm going to teach you. I think the best thing to do is like listen, and especially if you're talking to people of colour, they will have their own strategies of resistance that like may not be framed as decolonising, but racism is something that we're all processing, and I think it's just like going into spaces, seeing what people need, and then building things together in response to both of the intersections of your needs. And if it's something that you're really ambitious about, then there is funding available. I hope there's funding available, or there should be ways to fundraise. And that kind of goes to the thing about how can I be a good white ally, and it's not the question. It's the question your friend asked, not the question you asked. But I think like you can donate money to not to like a charity, but like to people in your community who are trying to build things. Conferences like this. Did you say there's like a donations?
Yeah, we have a donations tub.
Right.
And a PayPal.
There you go. There's always opportunities to be a good ally. But I don't think that was your exact question, but that's just the first question.
Yeah, just to echo what Jacob said about listening and seeing what people need. I know that, and finding the commonality. Don't go in with your own agenda, and find like what can actually like bind you together, but then enriching the experience of your knowledge, of your learning, and what you can bring. I know that Living Rent, the tenants union, through a lot of their sort of incredibly hard work, were able to then bring together people that would probably never understand like why should we demonstrate against Serco, like who cares, like that's just brown people getting like shifted out of homes. But because they've mobilised people and spoke about like a housing issue essentially, that brought people together, and there was a huge amount of visibility on the street. So it's finding that commonality. make the language accessible. If people are put off by language, it's a familiarity. People get used to other people, and that's what one of the main things is. It's like we're all pretty fucking frightened of each other, and we just need to get a little bit more used to each other and see each other like out of like particular contexts, and that takes away the fear, and that gets people, you know, to understand, support, and of course be a good ally without even having to ask like, how am I a good ally? Yeah, that's how to bridge like just shared knowledge. Like I know that some organisations, some grassroots organisations, could really benefit from responding to like government consultations, but don't have the time or the language to be able to do that. And then that means that that particular institution doesn't do anything because it's not hearing like from the voices that are actually like on the front line. Whereas if there's somebody that could, you know, respond to a policy consultation from a decolonial perspective whilst listening to what that activist, grassroots, non-funded by like the Scottish government could say, then that could actually like really change like legislation and change, you know, like from an institutional like perspective, of course. Because I know that with some stuff around like race in Scotland, that there's only a set amount of organisations that do policy consultations, and that's not representative of the experience of most people in this room, for example. And some of these organisations are in turn funded by the Scottish government, so they're only going to say like what, you know, is not going to affect their funding. So think about like how you could, you know, use that language in a way that's really helpful to the grassroots movement. Fight allies. I don't know. It's the language of the left. I think it's just about like being a good person, checking your power, checking your privilege, always checking yourself. You don't need to do the work for them. If they want to go off and read and become aware, great. But it's mainly about being your friend, and if you can have a good white friend, that's cool. But probably not. Probably not an ally.
But well, the question, that was your white friends question, right? And I think your question was more, how can we get people to a position where they want to learn? And I think that, like, for me, my answer to that question, like, you know, is just be yourself. Like, honestly, like, you know, just be yourself, and people will see you, and they'll see, you know, want to learn how to not be a dick to you. I think that's why your friend asked how to be a better ally, and I think lots of white people have that kind of question about how can I not perpetuate white supremacy, or how can I not do X, Y, and Z. And it's different when someone is your friend or family member, where it's not somebody who's like, you know, randomly on the internet demanding that you explain to them why colonialism was bad. Like, those people, you don't obviously owe them anything. That, you know what I mean? Or like some random person. But if it's a friend or family member, whatever, like, yeah, of course we should be able to have these kind of discussions with them. But I think it sounds like your question was not about how do we respond to those questions, but how do we get them to a position where they're interested in learning. And I think, you know, there's this assumption that that people of colour should be, you know, almost like going around handing out leaflets like, this is why people of colour are human beings and shouldn't be, like, you know, treated as if they've like just dropped out of the sky from space or something, like, you know, or like a piece of furniture that you can just stroke, like it doesn't have a consciousness. But, you know, I think that we shouldn't be doing that labour. We should be doing the labour that we want to do. We should be, you know, going after the career that we want, like, you know, growing a garden, like learning how to cook a nice meal, like doing all the things that human beings do, like without being like trying to navigate, like, how do I teach white people to like not be racist? So we should just live our lives and have the best lives that we can, and white people, if they're not trash and a waste of time, will be like, you know, maybe they won't ask us directly, but they might start thinking like, oh, I can see this structure of inequality that's happening. I'd like to challenge it. But one thing I would say in response to that question, how can white people be better allies, is speak up, because I've seen this like twice in the last week, where like there's been an instance of like some kind of intersectional oppression involving people of colour, and white people have been present and done this look of like, I can see that what's happening is really bad. Like, just a kind of like nod, and I'm like, well, say something then. Why are you not saying anything? Like, and I think I've heard this so many times where someone's like, and you know what? One of my white colleagues came up to me later that day and they said, I heard what happened between you and blah, 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 and I think you're right. I think you were totally right. It's like, but why didn't you say that then? Why is it always an afterthought? Why is it always like, we've missed the opportunity to do anything? Like, and I'm not saying that white people should go in with a big flag, like, no, stop racism! But like, just...
That could be quite funny.
No, just speak up, like, you know, back people up. And I guess that actually comes to the question of political blackness, actually. Like, you know, I think that when was political blackness useful? It was useful when people understood that blackness was considered to be this abhorrent, undesirable thing, and they were like, I'm going to call myself that because I want to show solidarity. But in 2018, you don't have to call yourself black to show solidarity. You can just acknowledge that the black liberation struggle is part of the indigenous liberation struggle, is part of the women's liberation struggle, is part of the queer liberation struggle, is part of the Asian liberation struggle, because all of our struggles are tied up with each other's, and you know, we can only be free by freeing each other, freeing ourselves, working together intersectionally. So yeah, I think that's when political blackness was useful, when people were making a stance, a political stance, and saying, I will call myself this thing to show that I don't think it's a bad thing. But I think that we're past that now, personally, I think.
Yeah, I think just to echo what you've said, but it's so key to find the commonality, and so you'll find like that, like the working class struggle, like here is white, right? And that's another way that you can connect people and being like visible. Like we have like, you know, our marches and stuff, and I think there's a place for that. Like there's people that are happy like being visible, marching, being present, but maybe don't understand like why they're on an anti-racist march, except I'm not anti-racist, and you know that's, sorry, I'm not anti-racist. God, I've I'm not racist, and again, you know, that's like probably racism that's been, or an idea of racism that's determined like through a white lens, but it's that doing, you know, the coming together afterwards and speaking and learning and wondering like what more you can do. If there are white people that can just, yeah, when you see something that doesn't look right,
see it.
Honestly, I know that it's like for terrorism, but it's actually like one of the.
But whiteness is terrorism. Sorry, but
that's like your message for today.
Exactly.
See it sorted.
Not white people, but whiteness.
Terrorism. Just don't call British Transport Police whatever you do. That's how many times I'm on trains. You know, I know even some, you know, there's white people in this audience just now that I know do a lot of work within their capacity to make sure that black people's experiences are centred and don't try and take praise for it or take credit for it. And I think it's that understanding without expectation. That's what a good ally is. It isn't the you're such a good friend. It's the support without the expectation, the being able to speak up, speak out. It's not going to affect you as much. It's not going to affect a white person as much as it's going to affect a black or a person of colour.
I just want to emphasise that it's not your job to navigate white fragility either. And the people who are the white friends in your life who are willing to try and help, they'll be obvious to you because they'll be with you and they'll be talking to you about it. Does anyone want to address the question on alternative labels? Any ideas?
I think people of colours. I like black and brown. That's my favourite alternative label. And someone mentioned the other day, like, oh, what about East Asian people? And I'm like, you're brown, you know. You're brown. It's fine. When I say black and brown, I just mean, I don't know. I just like that word.
You are of a hue.
Yeah. Don't know why. Sounds right to me.
Although it seems like a hue, like, as in a person, like a really posh white man.
A bunch of hues.
You this hue or that?
Hugh Grant or
Hue.
I think we'll take one other question and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, we have a couple more minutes.
Okay. Anyone have a question? Is there a question down here?
Oh,
Burning interest.
Over here?
oh, no, yeah.
where's the one at the back?
In the
There's one
front.
right here at the front row, in the yellow jumper.
I get it in so much passion for others. I think that it's like okay that black and brown is excluded East Asians, because I think like within people of colour, East Asians are like divide up like a dog. It's not fun.
That's a really interesting point, and I think like in terms of decolonizing, I worry sometimes that the term decolonizing becomes too centered around whiteness, and doesn't acknowledge that there's lots of other countries that have had like long histories of colonialism in Asia and in the Middle East, and like, you know, to a indigenous person from like Taiwan or something that's been like colonized by, you know, China, or you know, a person that's in part of North Africa that's been colonized by, you know, a Muslim Middle Eastern country. Like, these are also conversations that we should be allowed to have, and like, and intersections and specificities that we should be able to like unpack, and it shouldn't always be a conversation about how do we exist in relation to whiteness. I think it should be more about hegemony. So yeah, I think I'm glad thank you for making that point. But I do also think that, like, in my experience, East Asian people are hella racialized and experience loads of racism. So when I say black and brown and include East Asian people, it's because I want to talk, I'm talking about racialized people, I suppose. But I also think, you know, we should all be, language is fluid and it should be case by case, and if political blackness works for this person, black and brown works for this person, people of colour works for that person, you know, let's have a conversation about those things and not try and police them.
Thank you. Have anything to add?
Nice room dry.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here and listening to our panel. I'll just kind of like pull together some of my favourite takes from what was said today. I don't remember who said these things, but they were said. So someone said that, I think this might have been Layla, said that change takes a long time because power only goes so far. You talked a little bit about tokenism and how to use your tokenism to push for substantive change, and going beyond the like surface level diversity that you'll see in our equality and diversity initiatives, to support those who are in the role so that they can make change. Around political blackness, we talked about if we're going to use the term political blackness, how it should be used with an understanding of anti-blackness and how it manifests in communities of colour, and around how you kind of like build community work around like anti-racist action and decolonization, around like going into the spaces not with an agenda but to kind of see what's happening there, see what people's needs are there, and building together, and also to be a good white ally, see it, say it, sort it. Thank you.
Just Akugo said to say massive apologies to both you and the audience.
Akugo would have loved to be here, but unfortunately, when you're terribly sick with the flu, you do not want to take a 4-hour train journey. But I'm sure we'll work together with her on something in the future as Resisting Whiteness. We're going to take a break now for lunch. If you have signed up for a workshop, those are starting over in Pleasance West at 11:45. That's correct, at 1:45. And if you're not, go eat. We'll see you when you come back.